everyone. Thanks for joining. How's everyone doing? Let us know in the chat. My name is Ritika Asher. I'm a member of the OCJF Youth Council. We're just gonna wait for Jennifer to hop on real quick and then we'll get started. So let us know if you have any questions in the chat box below. There's also like a Q&A feature where you can type your questions into, and don't forget to donate to OCJF by texting OCJF to 44321 or by visiting our merch store. We have lots of different products and designs. I'm currently wearing a hoodie that I designed for the OCJF merch. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and I think I see Jennifer on here. Jennifer, if you're, oh, there we go, I think. Oh no, Jennifer, I think it's saying you have to update your app in order to join. Jennifer, can you send a request to join? Okay, perfect. Thank you. While we're waiting, let us know how you're doing in the chat. Yeah. Again, you can donate to OCJF by texting OCJF to 44321 or by visiting our merch store. We have lots of different designs and products, and all of the proceeds go straight to OCJF. I will drop the link in the chat. And you can also find the link in our bio. Oh, thank you, Elsa, for dropping the chat, or dropping the link. Yeah, we're just waiting for Jennifer to join. Okay. Jennifer, let us know when you're back. Also, today we'll be covering various topics, including the recent anti-Asian violence, as well as immigration policy and OCJF's mission. Oh, here we go. Here's Jennifer. I think. Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
How's it going?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Is the sound and video okay?
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good to me.
Sorry, if you can just give me 1 second. At any rate, it's great to be here. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you for having us.
I see familiar faces. Hi, Gracie Graham. Hi, Elo Jonesy.
So how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. So,
Hi, Felicity.
again, we'll be covering the recent anti-Asian hate crimes as well as recent immigration policies and OCJF's mission and also like how you can take action. And again, don't forget to drop your questions for Jennifer in the chat. And there's also a Q&A feature right next to the chat box, so you can put your questions in there too. So I guess we'll get started. Jennifer, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and hold on, I'm just like figuring out the technology. I have to confess, this is the first time I'm doing an Instagram Live. I know I'm totally dating myself by saying that, um, but it's really actually lovely and great. Hi, Norma. Hi, go back to France. I'm like seeing all these folks I recognize. But I think your question was how OCJF got started and what led
Can
us to begin this.
Well, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll get to OCJF?
Okay. First, myself. So my name is Jennifer Koh. I'm a lawyer, and I mean, I feel like I wear a bunch of hats. I'm a lawyer. I'm a law professor in those areas. My primary focus and passion, but also sort of my source of outrage, is immigration law and how we structured our legal systems, in particular, to treat immigrants and people of color. In other capacities, I'm an Orange County resident. I'm a mom. I'm a person who cares about the sort of humanity of our country and what our communities look like. But the way I come to a lot of this work, again, is through law and through my role as a teacher.
That's so cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about like why you're so passionate about immigration law?
Yeah, and in some ways, like maybe I'll just even go back to like my younger days, from even when I was in high school, as to kind of what connected me to this area of law. And sadly, in many ways, things have changed, but they have also not that changed all that much. And so in this past week, it feels like the country has had a bit of awakening in the aftermath of this massacre that took place in Atlanta. And not just what happened in Atlanta, but a whole year's worth of increasing attacks on Asian people in the United States for, essentially being blamed for things like the coronavirus, but also lots of hostility towards China and lots of lumping of people together. So for me, what initially drew me into the field of immigration law came in a lot of ways from my experiences just as an Asian American living, for example, in upstate New York. As a child, so it was just a regular occurrence to be kind of like taunted with racial epithets and like having really kind of offensive things said about whatever, my appearance, right, eye shape, where I was from, like the whole litany of taunts. They're so familiar to, every Asian American in the United States. And that's all connected to so much more. It's not really about the experience of just one community, because we're not all alone in sort of participating in right, this country that's really been based in so many, it's like on one hand on such beautiful ideals, but also on the other hand on such an ugly legacy of racism. So for me as a young Asian American, I think I spent a lot of time trying to sort of understand what was happening and like who I was, right, and where I fit in. But it's impossible to be an Asian American without confronting the immigration system, because our very first immigration laws were premised upon the idea that Asian people could not be part of America. And our very earliest immigration legal principles were really born from eras of Chinese exclusion. Of course, not just starting with Chinese exclusion. I mean, the country was built upon this legacy of, an utter genocide of the Native American peoples, just this brutal history of slavery that the African American community has experienced. Where all of our histories are tied together so very, very closely. But for me, because that was the place in which I sat, all of this was connected very much to immigration law. And, kind of like an onion, like you start peeling back one layer and then you see another and another and another, and it keeps getting kind of more complicated, but it also becomes more troubling and you start seeing more connections. That's kind of how it's been, right? So I've been doing this work for some time, and yet I still find that there are parts of the immigration system that I will learn of for the first time in the course of my work. I will find that there are parts of the immigration system that are really actually quite horrifying and disappointing. But I think as the layers get peeled back, I am also really challenged and find quite, kind of amazing the way that the community will come together, or different communities of people will come together to sort of shed light on different practices that are taking place, as well as, sort of how remedies and how solutions can be developed. So that's just a little bit of me, again, sort of occupying the space in this particular moment in history in this particular week. It's been, it's certainly been painful. It's certainly been heartbreaking. At the same time, it hasn't really been all that new in lots of ways. It's just kind of like more that all of a sudden the rest of the country is paying attention.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really inspiring. And it's also like kind of frustrating that it took a mass shooting for people to realize that there was anti-Asian racism going on in this country, and for people to become more aware about it. Um, so, going off of that point, in lieu of the recent anti-Asian hate crimes, what are some steps that need to be taken by activists for a national push in terms of immigration policy, law enforcement, and media to fight the anti-Asian racism?
Oh my, it's a great question. There's so much. I do think kind of like the overall awareness is a good thing. And so you see a lot of that. I've had like, I appreciate, different messages that people have sent me. I see different statements being posted. I guess there's kind of no single solution to all of this, right? It's sort of like, if I could ask for one thing, it would be to just sort of recognize that, look, when we have problems and challenges as a nation, whether it be like economic dislocation or a virus that, right, is requiring the country to shut down and really the world to change, whatever it is, right, whether it's like the existence of, I'm thinking of like 9/11, right, and like sort of the challenge of terrorism and whatnot. But anytime you have a national problem that is complicated, and when the response is to just blame a particular community and a particular people for that response, that has repercussions, you know? And so, we saw this happen like after 9/11, and we saw the harm and attacks and hate crimes against Muslim communities and people who are associated or perceived as being right from the Middle East. Like, it's happened already. One of the big events that catalyzed the anti-Asian violence and Asian American civil rights movement was the violent murder of a man named Vincent Chin, who had been in Detroit, and it was when the auto industry was going through a recession, and when Japan was seen as the threat. And so when his attackers attacked him, they kind of basically, called out racial epithets and, understood him to be Japanese, and he was actually Chinese American. So again, this is sort of like, if we could just recognize one thing, that just blaming a particular kind of person or drawing attention to the characteristics of a community and using that as our way of lashing out or releasing our frustration over a particular situation, that doesn't really actually solve the problem, right? Like, ultimately, the coronavirus will be solved, I think, through lots of different things, including the existence of the vaccine. Nothing really gets solved by calling it the China virus or making jokes about the Kung flu, but the harm is so great. And that's the same with immigration, right? The economic system is complicated, right? Demographics is complicated. Managing diversity is complicated. But simply saying, well, the solution then is to treat like all people who are coming to our borders as a threat, and to then say reflexively that the answer should be to incarcerate people, well, that's not really a solution to what is otherwise a fairly complex problem. So, there's lots of different solutions that are being floated out there, lots of things that smart people are proposing. There are other sort of interesting proposals out there, but I guess for me, that's what I'd like to see, is that we move away from just deciding to like scapegoat a particular community or type of person for our challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's really helpful. That's really great and makes sense. So now moving over to immigration. One of the questions that the Youth Council prepared was, what led you to start OCJF?
Yeah, so I did not start OCJF. I helped start OCJF together with a really incredible group of people, many of whom are still involved. There were folks like attorneys like Norma Garcia Guillen and Eric Dominguez. There were several other law professors, Annie Lai and Samir Asher. There were organizers on the ground, Alexis Teodoro, Carlos Pareo, Fabi Hakume. I mean, there were a bunch of people, right? And many of us had been working together for some time. In 2000, I think it was 16, many of us had in particular worked together with the Santa Ana City Council to pass a sanctuary policy that was a strong, robust sanctuary policy, signaling to immigrant communities that they would be safe, or at least that the city of Santa Ana would not work together with federal immigration authorities. So I think the way that OCJF came together was born of a desire to create more infrastructure and to create an organization that would be really devoted to highlighting the human rights and the legal needs, as well as to support community organizing around immigrants, but especially detained immigrants. So one thing that many people may know, but not everyone may know, is that up until several years ago, Orange County was actually home to anywhere between 2 and 3 immigration detention centers. So at the time, I was directing a law school immigration clinic that was located in Irvine. We were just 10 minutes away from the Music Detention Facility, which is a minimum security jail that housed immigration detainees. So not people who were serving sentences for criminal convictions. They were people who were being detained because the government wanted to deport them. People seeking asylum, people who had been long-term residents of the United States, including green card holders, were housed there. ICE detainees were also incarcerated at the Theo Lacey facility in Orange, which was a medium security prison, and really truly was a prison, right? Attorneys couldn't even have face-to-face meetings with their clients. If a lawyer wanted to meet with a client, you'd have to meet through a plexiglass window and speak through the telephone. And for a period of time, also the Santa Ana jail was detaining primarily LGBTQ ICE detainees. And so there was something about this, of knowing that ICE was incarcerating people in our own backyards. Those of us who were representing people there saw how starkly the need was for legal representation, for other kinds of needs. I think slowly people began, not slowly, I should say, but for some time, community members were also visiting people in immigration detention, right, simply to befriend them. But in doing so, they were bearing witness to some really pretty atrocious things that were happening, right? We were seeing things like the use of solitary confinement. We were just seeing cases where, any person would say, look, like kind of what is the utility of keeping this person locked up right? And locked up in this setting, right? And all of this is happening in the context of the whole national conversation, also around mass incarceration, right? Why are we as a country, the country that jails so many people, primarily Black and Brown people? And then kind of just like to add one more layer onto that is the fact that Orange County government authorities were profiting financially from their ability to incarcerate ICE detainees, right? So there was this whole element in which sort of our own local governments were essentially bringing in money, but off the backs and off really the pain of the jailing of people. So I think there was a lot of energy happening around that. There was also energy around efforts to convince local governments to fund deportation defense legal services for people who were detained and who were in removal proceedings. And that's one of, the really bold things that the Santa Ana City Council started in the 2017 timeframe, and one of the things that the Orange County Justice Fund really worked around. And also, then one more thing is that we also saw how when people were being detained, sometimes, I mean, not always, but sometimes they were able to receive an order from an immigration judge that it would allow them to post a certain amount of money called bond, and that would allow them to be freed. But these bond amounts, under the law, the minimum amount would be $1,500. They could be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, right? We were seeing this in Orange County. We were seeing this across the country, where people were being continued to stay in ICE detention because they couldn't afford these bonds, which were in the thousands of dollars. So one of the key things that the Orange County Justice Fund has really focused on for the past several years is raising money so that we can directly pay the immigration bonds of many people who are in ICE detention. I think now we've paid probably about 50 to 53 bonds for people, most of whom have had some ties to Orange County. So again, sort of all those things really kind of sustain the energy behind the building of this organization. I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. That's really inspiring. I love that story. But yeah, it's like really scary to know that we had 3 detention centers in our own backyard. And I'm really glad that OCJF is like fighting for immigration rights. So the next question we have was kind of going off of the same topic. What is one thing you would like to see change in terms of immigration policy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's so much there also that needs to change. I know immigration has been in the news. It's been in the news lately, in particular, over policies at the border. It's been in the news because the House of Representatives recently passed legislation that would allow young people or DACA holders to legalize their status. So, there are like 25 different things that could be done on a policy level. I guess if I had to just kind of emphasize one thing, it's that over the past, say, 20 years, right? The immigration debate, it's gone this way and that way. We've had different presidents. We've had George W. Bush. We've had Clinton, right? We've had Obama. We had Trump. Now we have Biden. Throughout all those changes, right, and the way that rhetoric has changed, one of the things that really has stayed the same has been that funding for immigration enforcement has continued to increase. The narrative that we need to have more and more border security and more resources for immigration enforcement, that has just kind of continued to go up and up. And other folks have put together these charts, and they just show this steady increase, again, sort of like of money, of personnel, of resources. But when you really look at the impact of what immigration enforcement has had on people's lives, on families, on communities, right? On sort of who we are as a country, I think it's really time to rethink that. So many people, it's not just us, but we are working in collaboration, various organizations who are asking us to rethink that very system that's in place, right? And to say, look, maybe it's time
Um,
to kind of both go the other direction, but work towards a world in which the primary business of our immigration authorities is not to detain and deport, but maybe it's to build a future in which the purpose of the government is a little bit, right, is different. Right? What is the real role that ICE and Customs and Border Patrol are playing? So that I think that ultimately at the end of the day is what I hope will happen. It's going to take us a while to get there. It's not going to come through like the lawyers raising the fancy arguments. It's going to come from just people across the country, right, joining together and saying, look, we need to build a different kind of system.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, yeah, I think that was really helpful. Just discussing like the decrease in funding, especially, just like how that needs to change in our country. Um, and I think the last question the Youth Council had prepared for today, and then we can move on to audience questions, was what can youth and really community members in general do to get more involved, and what can they do to improve the immigration issues in our country?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that like the youth council at OCJF is such a great example of this. I just when people come together and they commit to learning about an issue, right? More than just like a quick 5-minute video or a headline in a newspaper, but when they really say, look, I'm just gonna like commit some of my time and my effort to understanding this and maybe working with people who have been doing this work for some time and working with people who are really directly impacted, right? Not necessarily the professionals, but the folks who are on the ground who are living this in and day out. I think that really kind of impactful things can happen, right? So we all bring different skills. And I say that because I think sometimes for folks who are a little younger, the question is like, well, should I go to law school and is that the solution? Or, does that mean I should go get like a public policy degree and do X, Y, and Z? And, yeah, maybe that may be in the future, but that's not really kind of the answer and how you make change and how you become part of it. Sometimes it really is just like coming together with like-minded people and asking yourselves just like, what can we do now, right? And what can we contribute? Maybe it's throwing together a fundraiser with just the people who are in your circle and community and saying, look, we want this money to go towards somebody's release. And we're going to do that without like asking lots of questions about who they are and what they did and whether they deserve it. But we just want to start building this different future, right, that we think is possible. There's all kinds of things, right? There are ways that you can like educate yourself. There are lots of resources out there. There are lots of articles, lots of things to read. Again, it is an area where there's sort of always learning to be done. But I love the story in particular, Ritika, of like the youth council and how you guys came together and have just continued to meet and brainstorm and be creative. And you're doing what you do and know how to do, right? Like you know how to administer an Instagram live and not all of us do. But we're sort of like all learning together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's really great information. Thank you so much for that. Um, so that's all the questions that the Youth Council had prepared. I see one question from from the audience. I don't know if you can see that, but it says, "Do you have advice for youth on how to get started on being educated about immigration issues?" I guess we kind of just covered that, but if you have any other information.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot out there. Um, well, this is, I guess, the challenge. There's a lot out there, but not everything is like equally good. But there are a handful of books that I think are really fabulous. And I could add them to the chat if that would be helpful. You know, and some of these are books that like I happen to read or that I've assigned to students in the past. So for example, like a colleague of mine, Aline, they're actually all colleagues of mine, but some of the books I'll list are Alina Das's No Justice in the Shadows, Shobha Wadia's Band, Michael Kagan's, oh dear, I am The Battle for America, and Cesar Garcia Hernandez's book, Migrating to Prison. Also, there's this book called The Undocumented Americas by Carla. You know, I'm going to butcher her last name, but it begins with a V. She's a really incredibly talented writer. So those are a couple of things. You know, I might also recommend the Netflix documentary Immigration Nation. That's an excellent book as well. I thought I had seen Lindsay, who's the executive director of Immigrant Defenders Law Center, join. I'm not sure if she's still here. Follow her on Twitter. There's a whole bunch of folks to follow on Twitter. Follow Ocjf on Twitter, right? So I will actually make a confession. I get a lot of my immigration news on Twitter. I follow a bunch of folks who are just sort of really plugged in. I'm on Twitter at Jennifer Lee Koh, and so I'm not necessarily saying that following me would be the solution, but you can sort of like look to browse and see who else I follow. It's a mix. It's a bunch of other stuff as well, but there are a lot of really strong immigration voices that I regularly am listening to as well.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love how you get a lot of your information on Twitter. That's like, it's like the power of social media these days. Yeah, I mean, if you use it for like it can be very helpful, and it's like it could be a good cause if you use it for the right reasons. So that's really cool. And yeah, well, I'll look up some of the books that you suggested too. Um, if any of the other viewers have any questions, feel free to put in the chat. I don't see any more questions. Yeah, I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is a really wonderful thing that you guys are doing. It's an honor for me, so thank you. I don't know if you want to tell anyone who might be listening, like a couple words about the Youth Council, but I'll otherwise hang back and again, just express my gratitude.
Sure. Okay, so the Youth Council mainly focuses on like raising awareness and educating the youth community in OC. Like we do a lot of social media stuff like this Instagram Live. I know some of us like make graphics for the Ocjf Instagram, mostly like mobilizing the youth community. So yeah, that's the Youth Council, and if anyone is interested in joining, you can DM us at OC Justice Fund. Yeah, I think that's it. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Jennifer, for all of your amazing, insightful responses. It was incredibly helpful. Yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to log off now.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.